we're about to go on this little journey. Quite honestly, this is the first thing that's interested me and really excited me in a really long time. I'm a SharePoint engineer by trade. I work at Microsoft. I'm a Premier Field Engineer. Does anyone know what a Premier Field Engineer is? A couple people. All right, so basically when things go really bad and you don't want to call support and you want somebody actually on site, that's Premier. So you'll call Premier up and you'll have usually an account manager who will organize that time, and they'll send someone like me out on site to have that whatever problem sorted out. We also do training and all kinds of other things. So there's a lot of different aspects to being an engineer at Microsoft. Among other things, author, skier, a big skier. Does anyone else ski, snowboard? All right, sweet. I'm going to throw a lot more goodies your way this conference session. So hopefully we can get some more skiers on board. I live in Dallas, Texas. I'm not actually there. I wasn't born there. I was actually born near DC, but I moved to Texas maybe 3 years ago. Started, I don't know, I guess in Texas terms it's really small, but it's about 24 acres, a little ranch garden kind of thing. So I do that in most of my other spare time, among other things as well. Okay, so one thing I'll ask, and this is a little bit different from my session yesterday, is if you have any questions, just hold tight. I promise I'll answer all of them after, but it is so tight to get all this content in. We butt right up against lunch, so we have plenty of time if you want to hang out and skip the lines, and we can talk about whatever you want. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about just what is DR as a whole, very briefly, kind of lay out the ground terms. We're going to talk mostly about Azure versus SharePoint, which is a little bit different than a lot of the sessions that have been going on this week. I think these two go hand in hand, so I don't think they're too far off. I just think that one sort of supports the other, and it's good to at least know what your DR options are if you end up ever going to something like Azure. Talk about a couple different DR terms that we'll use. We'll walk through a couple different DR scenarios. We'll talk about what tools are available currently in Azure as it relates around our site recovery standpoint, and we'll do a couple demos. One is a walkthrough and one is a video. There's literally no way I could do the entire demo in this 1 hour. So hopefully with all that trimmed down content, we can walk through it and you'll get an idea of what we're actually doing. Any questions so far? Even though I asked not to ask questions? Okay, cool. So what is DR? DR basically total loss of data or service for X period of time or forever, right? So on average, at least back in the States, a Gartner report came out saying that average about $1 million US per hour for some of the very large enterprises, as SharePoint equals a tier 1 application in their enterprise. They're losing every hour that SharePoint's down. This goes to show sort of why it's important to have a true DR strategy versus VM backups or tapes offsite. And quite honestly, that's not really a DR strategy. That's just a backup strategy. That's just in case all else fails and there's no real time limit on getting things back up and running. That's a good super backup strategy. Well, we're talking about DR. So DR in terms of being able to bring something up with minimum or zero data loss within a few minutes or a few seconds. That is true DR. Right? So again, VM snapshots, not a DR plan. Quite honestly, I'll go into a lot of different customers and ask, what is your DR plan? And you would be really surprised that it, revolves around bringing up snapshots that are saved either in some other storage capacity or rolling back in content databases or whatever it might be. At the end of the day, that all works, and it all works within the time frame that you're sort of given around an SLA. But if your SLA is minutes with no data loss, that just doesn't work. Most of the true inhibiting factors around what is called true DR is the fact that it's really expensive usually, and it's really hard to do. How do you test real DR, right? So you have to set up this whole strategy around bringing down a farm that's never really supposed to come down, maybe in a dev environment or a test environment, to bring it up in a separate environment. It's just a lot of moving parts, and it's really hard to actually do. So like again, we're going to talk about, so there's a little bit of joke going on between a lot of the people in Microsoft that are in Europe versus in the US around the pronunciation of Azure. People in the US say Azure rhymes with badger. So there's a whole bunch of like stupid little badger icons in here, so hopefully you go along with the joke. I know that it's sort of silly. But like I said, this is more about Azure than it is about SharePoint, quite honestly. So we all understand SharePoint. We understand how the environment works. We understand how infrastructure works and what sort of capacity we need to plan for, how big server farms could be and grow and scaling up and scaling out. But how do we protect all that? So a couple terms, RTO and RPO, so recovery time objective and recovery point objective. So recovery time, exactly what it sounds like. How fast is your SLA to get your environment back up and running in real time, okay? And if that SLA means it's a tier 3 application and it could be a week with an all-out catastrophe, then that's fine. You're probably not looking at something like Azure Site Recovery in the first place. But if it's a tier 1 and it's hours or an hour or minutes, you know, if your entire business revolves around SharePoint, which there are many organizations that do, this could be a really, you know, challenging issue that you have to get through. RPO, recovery point objective. How much data loss is acceptable, right? Sometimes we think about DR from the perspective of, you know, something tragic happening. What about literally someone infects a database or corrupts it, or there's a virus that leaks its way onto a server and corrupts that server? You know, how do you do waypoints? How do you do 30 minutes from the last save or an hour from the last save or whatever it might be? So that recovery point objective is how frequently you want to have available recovery points throughout your objective. A couple of DR scenarios. I live in Tornado Alley, so tornadoes are a real possibility. I've actually seen many of these, unfortunately. The second two are pretty bad. I've literally gone on site and seen where a data center's air conditioning just failed, and they're literally yanking plugs out of servers. I mean, you can imagine, just in perspective of data loss, what that means, as real-time content's flowing to those databases, and they're literally pulling plugs because otherwise it's going to melt. The server is just going to go up. I've seen sewage pipes burst within data centers. That's fun too. Thankfully, I didn't have to clean that one up. And a whole mess of other things. Quite honestly, most of the time, it's somebody who shouldn't have had access to something and they're clicking stuff they shouldn't be clicking. Right? Those are usually what happens when a farm goes down or when there's an issue that you have to even think about disaster recovery in the first place. Somebody had access and they're installing stuff that they shouldn't have been. So there are many ways to do DR in Azure. If you're not familiar with what Azure is, basically it's, how do you even explain Azure? I mean, it's a complete, I don't know, man. There's so many different pieces of it, so many different aspects of what Azure is. There's infrastructure, there's different services, there's standalone applications that were once full servers in Microsoft Stack. So there's a lot of different things that Azure comes with. As a result, there's a lot of different ways that are sort of transitions of traditional methods of DR that you can do in Azure. So things like always on, you can have hot scenarios where you have an Azure VM up and running or multiple VMs up and running in Azure to do that data shipping across or keep that synchronous connection going. That's kind of DR. But what we're talking about specifically in our talk today is going to be around what's called Azure Site Recovery. This is pretty new. Has anyone heard of this prior to our session? I mean, maybe one or two, right? Okay. So Azure Site Recovery is sort of piggybacks off of these other services. So these aren't new, but they're sort of new how we're using it in Azure, especially with site recovery. So site-to-site VPN and ExpressRoute. We'll talk about what each one of those are here in a minute. So the pros of Azure Site Recovery, or ASR. So it's replication of machines based on policies. So currently supported, SQL's always on, Hyper-V, System Center, VMware, vCenter, a whole bunch of different SAN applications, and there's more actually coming within not even 3 weeks from now that'll be talked about and released with this, which is really, really exciting. So Azure Site Recovery can take VMs, VHDs from VMware, from Hyper-V, physical to Azure, which is interesting, but there's some downsides to that. We'll talk about that here in a minute. It can be synchronous, it can be near synchronous. Really whatever the business requirements are is where you can sort of line up Azure Site Recovery to be able to maintain that level of service. You can actually do restore points or waypoints, so that scenario where we talked about someone installing a virus by accident or getting into something they shouldn't have been into, where it wasn't truly a DR situation as an entire organization, but maybe just on that server or maybe just on that farm. You can restore back 30 minutes or a day or an hour or whatever it might be. This is actually true single button click failover. And in often cases, if you synchronize it with System Center, you're not touching anything. It just manages it for you. There's a whole bunch of moving parts behind the scenes, but once you get all that set up, it'll do it for you. You don't have to do anything. So it basically checks for a heartbeat. At the end of the day, we all hate buying insurance. I hate insurance in the States. It's really should be called like in case stuff happens. It shouldn't be called insurance. In case something happens, I'm covered, but I'm paying a ton of money every month to make sure that if something does happen, that I am covered. And that's really what DR is. And this is sort of addressing that gap between the complexity and the cost. This is eliminating a lot of that cost. And we'll talk about here what cost looks like. So as of right now, this is what it costs to run a SharePoint environment, having DR for a SharePoint environment in Azure Site Recovery. So 2 web front ends, 3 app servers, 1 always on, is somewhere around 250 pounds per month, okay? That's $54, I'm not sure of the translation at the moment, per month on-prem to Azure. There's no additional cost if you're an enterprise customer. So if you're an enterprise customer, I think up to 100 US or whatever the translation is of bandwidth needed to drop your VMs up into Azure is covered, and then as well back. So once that gap is hit, then you're only paying additional costs for like storage and processing and bandwidth like you would normally do in Azure. So it's actually really, really cheap. It's the cheapest on the market and quite honestly the most technological advance at the moment. So, I mean, it's cheaper than my car insurance, quite honestly. So the data costs that go into this are a little bit high the first time, right? So as you would expect, the way that this works is Azure needs to consume whatever that file base is. So whether it's a VHD, VHDX, your physical environment, that has to be shipped up to Azure at least once. From that point forward, you're doing Delta sends at that point. So you don't have to do it every single time, which is why this demo was actually hard to get within an hour. It's pretty much impossible. So sending a full farm up to Azure is going to take a little bit of time, but after that, you're done. So we'll talk about how to do that and sort of the speed and encryption and all that type of thing here in a bit. There are some third-party tools coming out. I know that the ASR team has a white paper out on Riverbed, which is basically a compression tool to send those compress those VHDs and send them up. So even still, prior to actually shipping them up to Azure and incurring that cost on bandwidth, you can compress them down and get them up a little bit quicker and a little bit cheaper. So the bad side, right? The bad side is there's a connection needed, an internet connection at some level from your farm to Azure, right? Because you have to send these VHDs. There's a synchronization process. It's not like you can export those VHDs out of that farm, put them on some other machine, and just simply upload them. So there's 3 different ways. Public internet, so you just have the VHD or the VM or the physical box connected to the internet. Obviously, there's risks there. You'll have to assume those risks going in, but it's free. Like, that's it. As much as your bandwidth pipe can maintain, that's how fast it'll be, and that's how cheap it'll be. Site-to-site VPN, a little bit more in-depth in terms of configuration, but there's some security there. There's some risk that you don't have to assume when you had a publicly available server on the internet. And then you have ExpressRoute. Quite expensive. ExpressRoute is basically an encrypted, I don't know how you would explain it, kind of a direct pipe from your location via your ISP up to Azure. So there's a lot of things that go into that as well. Right now, we don't support Gen 2 VHDs, and we don't support VHDXs. But the good news is, once you initiate that send and start that synchronization, Azure consumes those VHDs, that VHDX or that Gen 2, converts it to a Gen 1 VHD, takes that VHDX or Gen 2 VHD, sends it up to Azure, Azure converts it to just a Gen 1 VHD, and then uses that within Azure. When you need to fail back, it reconverts it to a VHDX. So we don't support it as it lives in SharePoint, or in Azure, but you can still use that same VHD and send it up, which is kind of nice. You don't really have to do anything. So physical to Azure is now in public preview. You still have to, private preview, that should be. So you still have to reach out to the ASR product group via some intermediary. If you're here and you think this is right for you and you want to get an idea of what physical to Azure looks like, Neil actually I know has a direct line, and myself have a direct line, so if you want to try to get your customer or your employer into that private tab, let me know and we'll sort of push that request along and you guys can handle it from there basically. But what that means is now you have the option to say, forget, we're not virtualized, we're physical, right? So we have physical index servers, we have physical SQL servers, we have physical web front ends, and we want to use this technology too. Well, you can. The only kicker at the moment, and it makes sense from a technical perspective, and I'm not sure how they're going to really go after this one yet, but once you go physical to Azure, there's that conversion process that actually happens that converts it to a VHD, but failing back, it cannot reconvert it to physical, right? So it's been virtualized. How do you take a virtual image and sort of flatten that out to a physical OS, right? So there's a little bit that's going to have to go into that. I know that they were sort of thinking about how to approach that and whether or not there's a good use case for it. I think there is. I think it's pretty powerful. So as of right now, if you go physical to Azure, let's say your web front ends were all virtual, most of your app servers were virtual, but let's say your index server or something like that was a physical box, and you sent that up to Azure and you said, okay, disaster's over, we can fail back now. All that's going to come back down to a VHD or into individual VHDs. So the web front ends and the app servers that are already virtual, that's fine, whatever. What you'd then have to do would be an extra step where you'd have to take that index server, let it still run. You have to assume probably a little bit of resource contention when doing actual indexes at that point, because it's a virtual and it's probably a reason why you put it on physical in the first place. And then maybe add an additional physical server back to that farm, offload that workload of that indexing for search indexing and put that back on the physical. So there's a little bit of extra work there when you fail back, but hopefully the fire is out at that point, right? So you can kind of calm down and do that process. So what's actually happening when you go physical to Azure is there's a couple things that actually get installed. There's a configuration server. It's an actual IaaS server in Azure that's running, but the cool thing is when you go through this step-by-step process in Azure to create your site recovery, you're basically filling in the field values, and Azure will stand up those IaaS servers for you, that configuration server for you that acts as that intermediary between your physical and your Azure targets. So I'll show you how that actually works here in a second. A couple requirements as of right now. 2012 R2, 2012 or 2008 R2SP1 for physical to Azure. There's a couple of ways you have to sort of address disk size and the amount of disks, which is probably a whole nother conversation, which we can get into if you need to ask questions about. I have a 2 terabyte OS server or C drive, and I have 40 connected drives to that server. How do I get around this? So we'll talk about that if you need to. You can't do BitLocker, right? Obviously, because you're bringing up a physical, which will then be a virtual, right? So BitLockering a virtual machine is not really, I'm sure it's technically possible, but not really the best thing to do. A couple others, you can read through those. Okay, so again, just no way to fit all this in, so I'm going to show you what the walkthrough looks like if you were setting up physical to Azure. So basically, you log into Azure, and there's basically what's called a vault. So you're setting up this vault. Think of it as a container or a bucket of where all this stuff is eventually going to live. It's all going to be interconnected with each other. You'd have to set up things like the vault and the network and the storage account to all live within the same region. So as of right now, I'm not sure if it's a bug or requirement, but if you try to create a vault, let's say in Northern Europe region, and the storage container for where these VHDs in Azure are actually going to live in, let's say, North America, it doesn't pick it up. It won't see it within the dropdown to be able to assign to it. Again, I'm not sure if that's a requirement or a bug at the moment. So create a vault, and you're basically going to get a couple different things. So the first thing you're going to get is deploy a configuration server, which is that step-by-step process. Actually looks very much like this. It's literally just that. So you're entering what the server is going to be, the username, password. Eventually, later down the road, you can decide what size server you're going to want this. I think by default it creates it as an A1. It's very small. It's basically just a heartbeat check. You create that, assign it to the subnet that you want. Hopefully you'd already have the network configured at this point. And then you download what's called the Azure Site Recovery Process Server or Provider. And that there's a key. So all this is, it sounds quite complex, but you'll see in the video that I'll show on the VM to Azure, it's all on one page. It's literally step 1, step 2, step 3, do these, and it's super, super self-explanatory. So you'll download the process server configuration tool and a key. It's basically a hash key that assigns your physical server to Azure, makes those connect and be okay in terms of security. Select which kind of VPN or which kind of connection that you want, if you have a VPN connection or if you're just going straight over the wire. There's a master target server that gets created, again, for you. You don't have to do anything, just fill in the blanks. This is all Azure IaaS overhead. That's the only downside. You're paying basically for this service to be running. It's very, very cheap because it's such a low server. So install the process server. Couple credentials you have to fill in Azure to assign it to a protection group. So protection group is sort of a container within that vault. So the protection group says, okay, web front end 1, 2, 3, app server 1, 2, 3, and SQL server 1 and 2 are all part of this protection group, and I want to protect all of these as one unit. So if I ever go down here, I want to bring all these servers up as a protection group. You can have multiples. You can organize in which order those servers come up. So obviously we'll want to bring up our SQL servers first, and then maybe our app servers, and then our web front-end servers, and that sort of thing. You can align them. You can even script your custom script to do certain things when these servers come online, whether that be an internal machine process or literally send an email to someone and tell them to turn this piece on or something like that. So it's actually pretty cool. Here's where you can decide what size the machines are going to be once they're brought over to Azure. So in Azure, you get charged for the size of the machine that you choose to use. Right, a G series is really expensive. You're using SSDs. There's a lot more overhead for Microsoft to carry that load, and they pass those savings on to you. An A1 or an A0 or A6 or whatever it might be, whatever the equivalent in resources for a specific type of server in Azure, how that matches what you had it set for in, let's say, VMware or physical or Hyper-V is what you'd want to choose here. Right, so if your app server was, 16 gigs of RAM and 4 processors and X period of disk, that's the type of server you're going to want to choose to create this as, unless you're trying to be skimpy about it. So there's scenarios where you have a DR situation and the requirement might be that the SharePoint environment is up and running. It might not be that it's up and running fast or to what on-site speed and capabilities might be. And in that case, you can save a lot of money here because you can downsize those. It's up to you, and it's up to your organization what you choose to do. So running an actual failover is really, really simple. You give it a name, right? You give it a source and then the target, right? So the target's always usually going to be the same, depending on unless you have multiple subscriptions or something like that. But running a failover at that point is creating this and then executing it. The cool thing about what's actually happening in Azure is when you actually do a failover, this is sort of addressing that complexity side of things and like, how do I do this, but at the same time not bring down my environment, but truly know that if I hit this button, it's going to work. So the cool thing that Azure does is when you designate you want to do a test failover, Azure doesn't touch any of your current, on-site stuff. Doesn't drop over that connection to Azure and start serving up content that way. What it then does, what ASR does, is it spins up a replica of what you've already synchronized over to the Azure ASR platform. So if you've done that synchronization process already and everything is already in your vault in that storage container, Azure says, oh, they want to test an Azure or an ASR failover. Azure spins up those machines, and you have 2 sets of server farms basically running within that platform that you then test those failovers sort of confined within that environment. So you can absolutely assume that it's going to work at that point if you do that test failover and everything works correctly internally, but it's never actually touching your production environment, which is really cool because at that point you know that, hey, if I do this for real, it's going to work. And that's really the risk of taking that whole production farm, touching that environment and by accident bringing it down or whatever it might be. Okay, so we talked about ExpressRoute a little bit. So I think it's really cool. It's also really expensive. And back in the US, the average cost is about $10,000 US a month per line. So if you need to fail over to multiple locations, that's 10,000 times however multiple locations per month. It's quite expensive. The good thing is it's all encrypted fast network. So it's just an extension of your network. It's a pure pipe. There's literally hardware I think the ISP has to install and do a whole bunch of other things. So it's not like you just say, hey, ISP, I need this service, here's money. There's like a whole process that goes into it with physical hardware. It will save you money over time, hopefully, right? So if you're doing a lot of data transactions across into Azure, you're doing a lot of VMs or just a lot of data as a whole, the speed in which you can get that stuff over is going to sort of offset the cost that you have to do if that's higher than the cost that was actually using to run maybe on a normal bandwidth pipe or whatever it might be. So I said lots of overhead. Here's what the overhead looks like. These are all the things you have to have in place just to make ExpressRoute work. Mainly the last bullet point. So site-to-site VPN is another option. It doesn't require any additional costs that I can think of. Maybe there's a certificate involved. I can't really remember off the top of my head. But you're going to need an Azure subscription, obviously. There's a couple other requirements from the hardware perspective. Windows Server 2012 machine with 2 NICs. I'm not sure why I have that twice. And a couple publicly available IP addresses. So you're basically setting up an extension of your VPN. So when you do a connection to Azure, you're basically doing a VPN connection, just like if you had an off-site employee working and they had a VPN connection going. Yeah, so that's all well and good, but everything I've just been talking about is physical, and you might be on VM, so let's talk about that. So let's do a quick demo, and I'll show you what that actually looks like. Now again, I recorded this, and this process took, quite honestly, it would have probably taken 3 hours or so to synchronize these. So this is kind of 3 hours in 8 minutes, a lot of trimming and whatnot. So I'll try to narrate this as we go. So here I have my, my Azure portal, and I'm getting ready to set up my vault here. I've created my vault, giving it a name. You guys see that okay? Cool. Checking my region, making sure that my regions are all in sync, so I don't have that issue come up later when I'm doing my, my container for storage. So you need a container basically because that's where all your VHDs are going to be stored to. So you can see my, my Evo demo is being created. The vault is being created. Now it's live. So I can go into that vault. And remember I told you that there's, well, check out this little guy here first. Remember I told you there's a checklist of all the things that you can create, right? Or all the things that you have to create, and they're actually in order. So you can see that, you know, by choosing the Hyper-V site to Azure, I then have a selected number of tasks that I have to do to actually make this work. Now, the one thing that you won't see when you try this in your Azure environment is this physical to Azure piece, and that's what we just talked about with the whole tap thing. So if you're interested, let me know, and we can try to get that sorted out for you, and they can sort of assign that to your subscription and make that show up so you can actually do this. But I'm choosing Hyper-V site to Azure. And there's a couple others. Obviously, you can do on-prem to on-prem. You can use Azure to do on-prem to on-prem. VMM sites with SAN arrays, you can do that too. You can do vCenter. A lot of different things that you can do here. So the first thing you have to do is create a Hyper-V site. Again, it's really just a series of nested containers. I'm not sure how they all sort of work together. Obviously, a VM or a Hyper-V site is going to be specific to the Hyper-V VMs that you're bringing over. So I've created that here, or I'm in the process of creating it. And once that shows up, I can now go on with the next couple steps here. So again, I go back to the dashboard, and now I'm downloading that registry key, or the registration key, sorry. And then the provider. So as I go through this provider, I think I do that next, or maybe the storage account next. Let's check real quick before I go into that. One thing you'll have to take into consideration is the time on the servers are actually very specific to the time of the region in which you're creating the vault in, right? So if your servers are in Southeast Asia physically and the time zones are set to that on the machine, you wouldn't want to create a container or a vault within North America unless you wanted to change the time zones on your physical servers. So if you don't do that, you won't be able to actually get to this next step where I choose the key, and that key validates where that server actually is, and there's a time check. What is your time stamp for, or what is your time zone set for your physical server and what's the time zone for where the container is. So I've hit this wall, so I hit open, and I can't even tell you on numerous occasions while trying to set up this demo how many times I would get a failure to the point where I couldn't understand what was going on, and I literally had to go through logs, which is always fun when you're planning a demo and getting things recorded. I must have gone through this take maybe 15 times, quite honestly. And it come to find out, I was creating, in my head, I was thinking, I'm creating this demo for London time, for GMT, but I was physically setting them up for South Central US, where I live. So the timestamp on my physical box was different than GMT time. So it was like, I don't understand this, and it's probably not a good idea. We're not going to allow you to do it. But it doesn't actually tell you what the time issue is. You have to go through the logs and oh, wait a minute. Okay, I get it now. So once I got past that point and I've got my hash done and everything can see each other, I'll go ahead and finish the installations, creating some certificates and basically allowing Azure and my physical machines to see each other, or my VMs or my physical hosts to see each other. Okay, so now I got that. You can see I'll bring up Hyper-V, and I've got my servers running here. I've got 2 apps, 2 web front ends, and a SQL box. They're all turned off at the moment. But that's what my farm will actually look like. And yours could be whatever. It could be 1 server, it could be 15, it doesn't really matter. So now I'm creating that protection group. So this is where I was saying that if your storage account doesn't live within the same region, it wouldn't show up here. So you'd have a lot of trouble, especially if you only had 1 storage account trying to figure out where this thing is supposed to go. It would just be blank. So I'm creating that. Now I'm specifying the replication settings. So I can decide at this point, okay, how frequent do I want to do these copies? Remember, they're just deltas. So once the copy is done, every 15 minutes, every hour, every day, whatever it might be. How long do I want to retain them for? Do I want to take snapshots of them, right? So a snapshot is a snapshot of the data of the delta from the last snapshot. So you're not actually taking full VHD snapshots at that point. It's just what's changed, which is really, really nice because that saves a lot of money on storage costs in Azure. Kind of walk through that here. Just the cost savings alone on a traditional DR environment, I think when I was looking through the numbers, it was upwards of anywhere between $100 per server per month to $750 per server per month on most of the generally accepted DR platforms that are out there now, with an average of somewhere around 450 US or something like that. I can do multiple farms for that amount of money in Azure. So I've got my protection group here, and I'll go into that protection group and show you how those are sort of aligned. I'll create my, or add the virtual machines that have happened during that synchronization of that install. So see, these are all, I'm seeing this in Azure, and these are all the VMs that are living on my physical VM host. Right, so I'm just saying what they are, what type of server they are. Obviously you can see that I can do Linux, or I can do Windows. This is a whole lot less stressful doing demos from a video, gotta tell you. Just talk to it. All right, so that's going to get created. And once I have those created, I can set up the order in which those things come up. I'll create my, my failover plan, and I'll do my test failover. Still going down here at the bottom. Not sure why I didn't trim that out, but there we go. So it's synchronizing. Now it's actually, it brought over those, it brought over that one server. So I stopped at that point. Otherwise, it was going to be hours to bring those servers up. But you can kind of see that. Let me go back just a bit. So you can see that it brought up, I don't have a zoom on my machine, but it brought up SP 2016 WFE2, right? It's synchronized that process actually took like 40 minutes. Trimmed down, and you'll see that process as it goes. It'll tell you how much percentage is actually done, completed, and protected. And then once it's done, it'll just say protected. Now, in theory, if I'd videoed this all the way through and let you see it all the way through, it would have brought up all those servers. And then I could add those to that protection group and that test failover plan. And then you'd actually see what that looks like. You know, obviously, it's just a couple bullet points that you don't see in this recording. So I'm going to create my recovery plan now. What do I do once things go wrong? So I'll create that recovery plan. Give it a name. Tell it where it's actually going to go. I'll go back and check the job to make sure that everything's finished synchronizing. So you can actually watch the status of the synchronization going off. Then I'll jump back over to recovery plan and create that. So you wouldn't be able to finish this had there been some other ones still running, any other jobs or something like that. Okay, create my recovery plan, select the machines that I want to have in that recovery plan. Again, obviously you'll see all of them if you go through this process. Okay, now that's done. So I'll go into my recovery plan, and this is where you can see any kind of customized actions that you want to do. So if you want to, you only see one machine in mind, but if I wanted to bring up, let's say, my SQL servers first, I could bump those up. You can move them up in that group or move them down in that group, and that basically equates to at what point are they going to be started up, okay? I can do some manual actions. I can script things out if I want to add some scripts to this. Okay, so we'll jump back there. And now we'll create our test failover. And quite honestly, at this point, it's simple as selecting the network that you want to fail over from and then hitting OK. So at that point, it's basically going to test your failover as soon as you hit go. So obviously, I didn't hit go, right, because I wanted to make sure that this would still work all the way through. So that's really how Hyper-V to Azure works. It's pretty simple. Oh, wait a minute, something's happening here. Any ideas what's going on? All right, let's try this. Good old-fashioned pull the plug. All right. When in doubt, just reboot, right? All right, so the only prerequisite as of right now is the VM host has to be 2012 R2. I leave that on one line because that's kind of a big deal, right? Especially if you're not currently running that, and to think about migrating those VMs up to a different OS, that could be a little challenging. So you'll have to plan that through if you want to use ASR. So subsequently, bad news is none of that's supported for SharePoint. As of yet, anyway. At some point in the future, that'll change, I'm sure, hopefully, after it's all supported and walked through and tested. Stay tuned. I think there's plenty of stuff coming out with ASR that's going to help to this. Hopefully they end up supporting it shortly. Okay, So, that said, anyway, that was just a stupid ending. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I actually finished early. I can't believe it. Have a good week and enjoy the rest of your sessions. Thanks.